Chapter 5. Professor Van Helsing. Professor Abraham Van Helsing arrived in Hillingdon 3 days later. He looked at Lucy for a few minutes, then he went back to Amsterdam. The next day Lucy seemed better. But if Lucy seemed better, Renfield did not. He was very quiet after his escape. He just sat in a corner without speaking. Dr. Seward tried to start conversations with him, but Renfield always answered in the same way. "He's left me. There's no hope. He's left me." On the third day after Van Helsing's visit, Lucy became ill again. Dr. Seward immediately asked Van Helsing to return. The professor arrived the following evening, and Dr. Seward took him up to Lucy's room. Lucy was worse than before. She was very pale and weak. As Van Helsing looked at her, excited voices from the doorway broke the silence. It was Arthur Holmwood and Quincy Morris. "I came as soon as I could," said Arthur. "She's worse, I hear." Van Helsing took the two men outside and said, "She is in the greatest danger." "Danger?" cried Arthur. "But what can we do? I will give the blood from my body to save her." "Good," Van Helsing replied. "That is exactly what she needs. She has lost most of the blood from her body, and she needs the blood of a young and healthy man like you. Please, Mr. Holmwood, take off your coat. We must act immediately." Without a word, Arthur took off his coat and pulled up the arm of his shirt. Lucy didn't feel the cut that was made in her arm. She was too ill. 10 minutes later, the blood from Arthur's arm began to give colour to her pale face again, and her breaths became easier. "We will now leave Miss Lucy. She must sleep," Van Helsing said. "Tomorrow I shall return, but we have to do one more thing before we leave." He went downstairs and returned with a box. He put it on Lucy's bed. "Open it," he said with a smile. Lucy put her hand in the box and pulled out some little white flowers. "Oh," she said, "these are garlic flowers. Is this a joke, Professor?" Van Helsing looked at her seriously, rested his hand on hers and said, "This is no joke. Please take them, or you will be in great danger." He saw that she was frightened, so he continued in a softer voice, "Do not be afraid. I am here to help you. These flowers look ordinary, but they can protect you. Believe me." Van Helsing stood up. While the others watched with surprise, he shut the windows. Then he took a handful of the flowers and pressed them all round the windows, the door, and the fireplace. Finally he made a small ring with the other flowers and placed it around Lucy's neck. "Do not open the windows or the door tonight," he told her before he left. "And do not take these flowers from your neck. It is very, very important." The next day, at 8 o'clock, Van Helsing and Dr. Seward went together to the Westenra house. They were met by Lucy's mother. "Lucy seems better," she said. "I've just looked into her room. She was sleeping well, so I didn't wake her up." "Good," said the professor. "So my idea was successful." "Perhaps my idea was successful too," Mrs. Westenra smiled. "I went into her room before I went to bed last night. She was sleeping quietly, but there was no air in the room, and there was a strong smell from some terrible flowers round her neck. I took them away and opened the windows. You'll be pleased with her, I'm sure." Van Helsing's face went pale. He said nothing, because he knew about Mrs. Westenra's weak heart. It was dangerous to frighten her. But when she left the room, he ran up the stairs to Lucy. "This is bad news," Van Helsing said to Seward, carefully studying Lucy's pale face. "I have to return to Amsterdam today, but you must sleep in this house every night, in this room if necessary. Boxes of fresh flowers will arrive every day. You must do exactly what I did last night. I shall return in 4 days, or before, if you need me. Guard her well." Guard her? Dr. Stewart asked himself, as Van Helsing left the room. Guard her against what? Chapter 6. Only the beginning. The next few days were hard for Jack Seward. He was at the hospital all day, and at Hillingdon by night. Every morning a fresh box of garlic flowers arrived by special post from Holland. Seward did exactly as the professor showed him on the first night. He did not like it, because it seemed too unscientific. Dr. Seward was a very scientific man. But it seemed to succeed. The colour slowly returned to Lucy's face, and the wounds in her neck began to get better. But he was very tired at night. He was woken up many times by strange sounds from outside Lucy's window. At first he thought that a tree was moving against the glass in the wind. But the next day he realised that there was no tree near the window. It was probably my imagination, he told himself. Renfield was also making trouble. One day he suddenly attacked 2 men. He was walking in the garden with a guard when he noticed some men. They were driving a cart along the road from Carfax. The guard was just able to pull Renfield away. Dr. Seward decided to take the men's names and to give them some money. Early one evening, Seward was sitting in his office. He was reading the newspaper before he went over to Hillingdon. Tired from writing reports, he was falling asleep over a story about an escaped wolf. In his dreams, the wolf was jumping in through the window, when suddenly the door crashed open. It was Renfield. He ran straight at Seward with a kitchen knife. Seward stood up and tried to keep the table between them, but Renfield was too quick. He pushed the knife into Seward's left arm. Angrily, Seward hit Renfield on the head with a heavy book from his desk. Renfield dropped the knife and fell face down onto the floor. Blood from the wound in Seward's arm fell onto the floor next to Renfield's face. The guards came into the room and lifted Renfield to his feet. He kicked wildly as they took him from the room. He screamed, "Blood is life!" But Seward wasn't listening. He only had eyes for Renfield's screaming mouth. "I don't believe it," Seward thought. "The madman's mouth is red. He drank my blood as it fell to the floor. The man's sicker than I thought." "Blood is life!" Renfield screamed again as they carried him from the room. And Seward, weak with pain and lost blood, fell to the floor. Seward sat up in bed feeling very weak. "Perhaps I've lost too much blood," he thought. He looked at his watch. It was 10 o'clock and he wasn't at Hillingdon with Lucy. "Hillingdon? Impossible, my dear Seward," said Dr. Hennessy, one of his assistants. "You must stay in bed." "I'll stay here if you visit the Westenra house," Dr. Seward said. "Tell Miss Lucy to do the usual things," he added, as Hennessy was leaving. "She'll understand." Seward slept late the next morning. He was woken up by a boy with a special message from Amsterdam. Seward opened it and read, "Be at Hillingdon tonight. Very important. Arriving early on 19th. Van Helsing." "Oh, no," Seward thought. "That was last night. What does Van Helsing mean?" He did not wait for breakfast. He drove straight to Hillingdon. It was still early. He did not want to wake Lucy or her mother, so he rang quietly. He hoped to bring a servant to the door. No answer. He rang again. Still no answer. He put his ear to the letterbox. Everything was silent. He thought that something was wrong. He walked round the house, looking for an open window. Everything was carefully shut and locked. But then he came to Lucy's mother's room on the ground floor. Her window was broken, and there was blood on the glass. In the flower bed below the window, there were signs of an animal's feet. Perhaps they were made by a dog, Seward thought. Or even. He remembered the escaped wolf and shook his head. No, that's not possible, he told himself, feeling stupid. He stood up and looked around him. The house and garden were unnaturally quiet. He went down on his knees and looked at the signs in the earth more carefully. Suddenly, he heard a sound on the path behind him. He jumped up, ready to defend himself. But it was only Van Helsing. In a few breathless words, he told the professor about Renfield and the message from Holland. "I am afraid we are too late," Van Helsing said. He put his hand through the broken window and opened it. They climbed into Lucy's mother's bedroom. There, on the bed, lay Lucy and her mother. Great fear showed on Mrs. Westenra's face. Seward felt her hand. She was dead. Her other hand was holding tightly onto a ring of flowers. Seconds before dying, she probably reached out for her daughter. Then she pulled the flowers from Lucy's neck. Lucy lay by her side. The wounds on her neck were wide open, and there were signs of new bites. Van Helsing held her hand and placed his ear close to her chest. "It's not too late," he cried at last. "Quickly, get some hot water and towels. We must keep her warm." When Dr. Seward ran through the dining room, he found all the servants on the floor. He smelt their breath. Something in their drink, he thought. Something sent them to sleep. Returning with a bowl of hot water and some towels, he told the professor about the servants. "Go and wake them," Van Helsing said impatiently. "We need their help. And get Mr. Holmwood. It is possible that Miss Lucy will die. He will want to be here." Because Lucy was so weak, Van Helsing did not want to wake her. He thought it was unwise to give her fresh blood. Dr. Seward watched her while she slept. Short, painful breaths escaped from her open mouth. Then he looked more carefully. There was something strange about her mouth. Her teeth seemed longer and sharper than usual. But minutes later, she opened her eyes, and the colour returned to her face. She was again the beautiful young girl he loved. Arthur was brave. He sat with Lucy all the time, and his face never showed the sadness in his heart. Van Helsing later sent him to sleep in the sitting room. Seward stayed by Lucy's bed. At about 6 o'clock in the morning, Van Helsing came in and gave Seward a rest. He looked at Lucy's neck. As he looked, a strange, cold feeling passed over him. The skin on her neck was smooth and unbroken. "Look," he said to Seward. "The two red wounds have completely disappeared." Then, looking sadly up at Seward, he said, "She is dying. It will not be long now. Wake that young man. He must be with her at the end." When Arthur came, Lucy opened her eyes. "Arthur, my love," she said in a low voice. Arthur moved to kiss her, but Van Helsing stopped him. "No, not yet. Just hold her hand." Lucy's eyes closed and she seemed to sleep. Dr. Seward noticed again the strange changes to her face, the tight skin, the open mouth, and the long, sharp teeth. Then, in a soft, sleepy voice, Lucy spoke again. "Arthur, kiss me." As Arthur moved towards her, she opened her eyes. They were as hard as stone. Before Arthur could kiss her, Van Helsing roughly pulled him back. "Not for your life!" he shouted. "Not for your living soul!" An angry shadow passed across Lucy's face, and her sharp teeth closed with a terrible metallic sound. Then a cloud of calmness came over her, and she was suddenly a pale, tired, dying girl. She tried to smile, but she was too weak. Van Helsing looked at Arthur. "Now, my boy, take her hand in yours and kiss her now, but not on the mouth, and only once." Arthur kissed her, and Lucy's eyes closed. Her breaths became more difficult, and then they stopped. "It's finished," said Dr. Seward. "No," Van Helsing replied. "I am afraid that this is only the beginning."
End of CD1.